Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is J.R. Moore coming to you live from deep in the mountains of the Missouri Ozarks. On Wednesday, the 9th day of October, year of our Lord 2019, welcome to the John Moore Show. We begin our shows with something that, if elected, Hillary Clinton would definitely make illegal. That would be the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Prepper tip of the day, gentlemen, you want to be a hero for the women on your team, do the following. Stock up, get case lots of feminine hygiene products, and of course, lots and lots of general toiletries, soaps, shampoos, especially all those products that girls like to use, and I don't know what they are particularly, but figure out what they are, and stock up on them by the case. You get better prices. We have patient waiting in the green room, my friend Professor James McCanney. Professor McCanney taught astrophysics at Cornell University. He taught mathematics at Cornell University. He is the author of, I believe, 11 books with more on the way, weekly radio talk show host, and amateur archaeologist who consults with various governments where he conducts his research. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, John. I like your tip of the day. And it's especially appropriate to people that live around the Bay Area today, because PG&E is cutting off electricity to over 1 million people out there, saying it's because they're afraid that the electricity might start wildfires. And this is going to go on for a while.
Is there evidence that that's happened in the past, where the routine transmission of electrical power has caused wildfires?
No, and there's the story on this is that when wildfires were going on, PG&E started to go bankrupt, and they said, "Well, gee, with all this wildfire liability, we have to go bankrupt." And then it was determined in a court of law that it was not the electric company that was responsible. They went running into court demanding that they were responsible for the wildfires,
right?
And that was to allow them to go bankrupt.
Oh, PG&E was demanding, not some outside third party.
Yes, PG&E was insistent that it was their fault, but it was all a hoax so that they could go bankrupt and hide the fact that they had misspent the public trust, the public money on boondoggles like three-blade wind turbines.
Okay, now you're in an area that I have some familiarity with. Did this hearing take place in the federal bankruptcy court? Is that where this took place?
Well, no, it was in the determination of who would be responsible for these fires.
Oh, okay.
And the damage thereof.
Well, who were the parties? Who was on the two different sides?
Well, it was an investigation. It was basically an investigation of who was responsible.
Okay.
And then finally the investigation came up that some lady had put in some home brewed electrical equipment on her little ranch out there, and that was the cause. So PG&E came running back into court demanding that they would be responsible.
Right.
And that allowed them to proceed with their bankruptcy, which was a separate case. So anyway, that's the background. But I know a guy who is an accountant who worked for PG&E, and he said their modus operandi was to buy as much as possible to cause as much debt as possible, because in debt, for every piece of debt there was overhead that the company could charge, and therefore the money, that overhead, is what people could then divvy up amongst the higher-ups and the stock owners and people like that. So their goal was to spend as much as possible to drive the price of electricity up as much as possible. And of course, like all good electric companies today, they're severely indebted because of the nuclear power plants that they own.
Okay, and I think most of the nuclear power plants are either at or past their expected useful productive life for being in production of electricity, aren't they? Okay, well, we got a technical issue here. we had a technical issue, and Jim will be back as soon as we can get him back on. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. On the national political scene, things continue to become more and more bizarre. When a friend of mine told me, it's been more than a year ago, maybe as much as a year and a half ago, that Hillary Clinton would be running for president again, I thought, no, I told him, no, that can't happen. There's no way. Now, however, she is on a nationwide book tour with her daughter. Okay.
What was the last thing I was saying?
Well, we were talking about the investigation with PG&E and bankruptcy and how they were building up all this debt that it could be split up between the stockholders. Well, it looks like they've been exposed and they're not going to get their wish. Is that pretty much where that matter stands?
Well, no, they're going to get their bankruptcy.
Oh, well, they will. Okay.
Oh, yeah. And I've been talking about this recently on the air, too, is that all of the major electric power companies in the country will be in bankruptcy court within 2 years, and this is going to drive electric prices through the roof. But the situation right now in the Bay Area, San Francisco and surrounding area, is that today over 1 million people are going to lose electricity. They're literally not going to have electricity, and they don't know when it's coming back, and it's not going to get cured anytime soon. And
okay, what's the backstory? The public story is obviously a false make-believe deal. What's the real? Why are they doing this then?
Well, I believe it's because the company is deeply invested in nuclear power and alternative energy. California very big in what you call alternative energy, and they have totally mismanaged the money, and they're just shutting down. They can't provide electricity to the people, to their constituency. Yeah, I think it's because of the nuclear power plants myself.
Okay, just as you were getting, we had a technical difficulty and you weren't there. I was making the statement that my belief is that all the nuclear power plants in this country are at or already past their expected useful life.
And that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, 104 of them, not a small number, and that's the situation where they can't upgrade them. They don't have the money. They can't decommission them because they were supposed to save the money to decommission, but they didn't. And even if they did save the money, it wouldn't be enough to decommission these plants that are failing and leaking, and so it's a giant mess. Nobody's talking about it.
The last time a nuclear power plant was built in this country and put online was about when, Jim?
Actually, not too long ago.
Oh, really?
But the majority of them are probably 20 plus years and more.
And when they're brand new, they're expected to be in use for how many years before they're taken offline?
About 20 years. The price of the price of nuclear electricity is boondoggle, just enormous. I mean, it's stellar. Let's put it in terms of, it's stellar in terms of cost to build, to run, to maintain, and to decommission. You put all that cost together, it's the most expensive electricity in the universe.
Amazing. Well, I stood next to a V8 engine in a pickup truck that ran on hydrogen that was being taken by out of water. And I don't know why that couldn't be done on a larger scale. Use electricity to get the hydrogen out and then take that hydrogen to generate power.
Well, there's a couple things that if you can generate electricity, then just use that, because to reuse the hydrogen is a heat process. So you go through the Carnot cycle twice. So you're getting 30% and 30%. You're down to 0.3 times 0.3 is 0.09. the percentage of the energy used. So it's not an efficient process. And so people talk about thorium. Oh, maybe we can go to thorium. First of all, it's not commercially viable. And second of all, it's a heat engine. So you're losing, after all factors are taken into account, you're losing about 80% of that energy into the atmosphere right now. So heat engine energy technology is a bad idea. Albert Einstein used to say that heating your coffee with nuclear fuel is a bad idea, and that's what he was talking about.
Right. We got a caller on hold here. We got Jerry in Texas. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning, John and Jim. Professor, I read something, oh goodness, it's been a while back, that something like 60% of the energy that electricity that's produced by a nuclear power plant went into the operation of that plant. Is that true?
Well, not into the operation. It goes right into the atmosphere. It's more than that. It's this is what I was just saying, is that due to, it's called the Carnot cycle. It's a theoretical limit of how much energy you can get out of a heat engine to do useful work. And it's around 33%. But when you add in all the other inefficiencies, you get, by the time you turn on your light bulb or toaster in your house, it's down to around 20%. And so if you have 100 coal cars or nuclear, it doesn't matter if it's nuclear or coal or whatever, but imagine it's coal cars. Imagine 100 coal cars, 80 of those go into the atmosphere as heat. The other 20 go into actual electricity that you can use in your house. So, and then by the way, that's the biggest reason why global climate change is a hoax, because 80% of the energy, no matter what your heat engine source, 80% of the energy goes right into the atmosphere. So what are you worried about? A little bit of greenhouse effect in 20 years, you have to deal with 80% of that heat right now, and nobody talks about that. That's the scientific joke about global climate change that nobody even mentions. All of the experts and PhDs running around, that seems to escape everybody.
Okay. I was kind of curious. The way that article read was that I guess the usable energy that it produced that could be delivered, 60% of it or over half of it was used for the operation of the plant itself. Pumps, controls, that sort of thing.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. The Carnot cycle theoretically would say you can get 33% of that energy out to create electricity, but when you take in all the other overhead, you're down to around 20%. And so that's about the right number, that 60% of the energy actually produced is actual usable energy. And so what you get is 20% of the energy expended, nuclear, coal, whatever, actually creates electricity that you can use. It doesn't matter if it's thorium or fusion or coal or natural gas. Doesn't matter. They're heat engines, and that's why, like with the wing generator, all I got to do is produce 20% of the energy that's consumed in producing electricity. I don't have to produce 100% of it to produce all of the energy for the United States or any other country. All I got to do is produce 20%.
Okay, that number, does it factor in on energy loss on transmission lines and other?
Yes, that's how I started this whole thing.
Okay.
As I did a study, I did a study based on Xcel Energy up in the Midwest, Xcel Energy's inefficiencies, and that's what I came up with. And then I also did a study on what you call alternative energy. This is back in the early 2000s. So alternative energy being basically three-blade wind turbines and solar, and I made the determination that it was a hoax, that the three-blade wind turbines and the solar could never, ever provide 100% or even close. It couldn't even provide 1% of our energy needs on a worldwide basis. So why were big companies like GE and Siemens pursuing that? Because it was a hoax. Their central core business is central power companies. So they were creating the illusion of alternative energy and then presenting it to the public, causing a huge amount of debt through the government subsidies, and for something that would never ever work. I wrote about that in my book, the McCanny Wing Generator World Energy Project. I have an addendum to that book, written in 2009, stating exactly everything you're seeing today, that the power companies would be going out of business, that nuclear power was a big boondoggle that was dragging them down financially, and that three-blade wind turbines and solar would never work, but it was designed to suck all of the alternative energy money out of governments worldwide. I interviewed, what's his name? I'll think of it in a minute, who wrote Clinton Cash, the guy that wrote the book Clinton Cash. And the Clinton Foundation was doing bribes all around the world to get solar panels and three-blade wind turbines installed all around the world.
Social media and the use of the internet is fast becoming the primary source of people for news, regardless of demographic. RBN has set out to provide some of the best news on the internet through republicbroadcasting.org, and also has begun to use the tools to our advantage by way of social media. Republic Broadcasting is now operating a Facebook page to function as yet another avenue to have our collective voice reach new audiences across not only America, but across the globe as well. The Facebook page features not only news, but also an RBN player to listen to our broadcasts. Get involved by visiting facebook.com/Republic Broadcasting and liking our page and share it with your friends and family, because you can handle the truth.
All right, we're back. Wednesday, the 9th day of October. We're going on a cruise, Caribbean cruise. If you want to go with us, you've got 3 weeks to reserve your cabin, and then that's cut off. 3 weeks to make your reservation for your cabin for the Caribbean cruise, Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. Details at my website at thelibertyman.com. If you don't have internet access, many of you don't, give Betsy Murphy a call, our cruise director. She'd be glad to mail you a full-color brochure. And her telephone number is 636-530-9502. Visiting Professor James McCanny. And Jim, you've got not one but 2 weekly radio shows. Tell people how they can listen live into the archives, if you would, please, sir.
Thanks, John. Yes, every Thursday evening, 6 p.m. Central Time, from WWCR, Nashville, Tennessee, the James McCanny Science Hour at the Crossroads airs, and then it re-airs many times, and the archives are on my webpage, jmccsci.com. That's been going on for about 20 years now. And then also my paid cast, which is $3.95 per month, and every week a deep dive into esoteric scientific topics, all of that available on my webpage. And,
all right. Did we finish up with Jerry's concerns and comments?
I just remembered over the break who I had interviewed. His name is Charles Ortel, and he was asked by the German government to investigate Siemens along with a kickback scheme that was through the Clinton Foundation, where they were, remember when Hillary Clinton raised her hand in a debate and she said, if elected, I'm going to install 50 million solar panels in the United States.
Right.
And it's like she was in collusion with these companies to sell alternative energy on these boondoggle programs. And the German government was suing Siemens and the Clinton Foundation for putting bribes to foreign leaders all around the world because Siemens is a German company.
Exactly. And the book you were referring to, Clinton Cash, the author is Peter Schweizer.
Peter Schweitzer. I was confused there because Charles Ortel, his webpage is charlesortel.com, and he's been big on studying the Clinton Charity Network and Clinton Foundation facts. So I'm sorry, I got that mixed up.
Well, it's easy to do. There's a lot of facts jumping around in our brains here. Our next caller, is Elizabeth in New York. Morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Professor McCanney. The reason why I'm calling is I have a real big concern. My sister lives on a buffer zone of a nuclear facility storage plant. I don't know if the word is plant, but facility.
Yeah,
and
storage.
I'm concerned about with all these Earth changes, or even if there were any near-Earth asteroids that came in, or EMP or something.
How
safe is she going to be?
Okay,
which plant does it have? Do you know which plant it is?
Yeah, I do know which one it is, Professor. It's West Valley.
And where's that?
It's in New York.
Oh, okay.
And there were things going on. There were things going on years ago, and I'm greatly concerned because they used to come on her property, take soil and water samples without her permission. One time, her husband picked up a radio transmission that he shouldn't have picked up, and the men in black visited my sister. There was all kinds of things going on, and I have heard things through the Discord state-by-state groups that a lot of these facilities are in failure, and they're not letting people know. And they even take contracts out on people to do away with anybody who talks about it.
Well, it's to that level. I don't know about contracts because that's specific, but yeah, it's the nuclear industry is one of the most corrupt industries on the planet, and the movement. I mean, just the Uranium One deal. We talked about that a week ago, where Obama okayed billions of dollars in cash to be moved to Iran, where they bought American uranium through the Russian-held company in Canada called Uranium One, and other deals that basically hit it, and Hillary Clinton okayed it, and then got kickbacks into the Clinton Foundation as we sold it through Russia and then paid for the uranium in Iran with cash. So anyway, yeah, and then when the cash hits, and of course Biden was in on that, John Kerry, and none other than Robert Mueller, the head of the Mueller investigation and report. Mueller is the guy who hand-delivered the yellow cake uranium to Putin personally to make sure that it was high quality for the purchase. That's, so no, it's the most corrupt industry on the planet. The big issue is storing the fuel after it's spent. And so anyway,
the 9th day of October. My website is thelibertyman.com. That's thelibertyman.com. We've got lots of things there, including a link to Professor McCanney's website on my links page. We got the latest important article written by Mike Adams. Mike's been doing some great work. That article is right below the photograph of me receiving the Prague Peace Prize. And, of course, the hobby farm for sale, just to the left of that. Turnkey, ready to go, owned by a friend of mine in my zip code, about 2.5, 3 miles from my driveway. He and his wife want to live closer to their adult children, so they put their dream home up for sale. It's beautiful, ready to go. Also, my website, if you've got arthritis pain, joint pain, back pain, you need an energy cleaner. That's pure and simple, you do. If you want to sleep as good as a small child overnight like I do, get yourself an energy cleaner. I was pretty active around the ranch here yesterday, helping a buddy of mine with a backhoe. I was on the ground using a shovel, moving rocks, moving some other heavy objects, doing a lot of strenuous things I typically don't do. Went to bed with some aches and pains, woke up pain-free after a great night's sleep. Only $285, shipping included to American zip codes. Keep in mind I offer a 90-day money-back guarantee. The mattress pads, I got everything in stock. I got the twin size, full, queen, king, California king, the handy travel size. You can place your order on my website using PayPal, MasterCard, Visa. You can call my toll-free hour line 24 hours a day, 800-592-9543. I say again, 800-592-9543. Visiting with Professor James McCanney, his website's linked to my links page. And Elizabeth, you were inquiring about earthquakes just before the break.
Yeah, I'm concerned. Like if there's an earthquake over here, and that the in-ground storage of the nuclear waste and everything.
Yeah, well, here's
what
the
would
issue.
happen in the event? I mean,
yeah,
would there be some kind of a nuclear explosion of some kind, or?
Well, okay.
Even
here's
if
the issue.
lack of electricity, for the cooling and everything.
Okay, let me explain what the issue is. The issue is that all of the nuclear fuel there, or the vast majority of it, has to be cooled on a continual basis. The more they produce, the more they have to cool it. Cooling is a very inefficient process, like running an air conditioner in your house, except big enough to keep nuclear fuel cool. It's a horrifically energy expensive process. If that cooling shuts down, then these casks will overheat and melt down. It's just that simple. And so there's a big problem. If you remember a couple of years ago, there was was it the Missouri River, or what is the one that comes out of North Dakota and then meets in with the...
That's the Missouri River, right.
Yeah, the Missouri River was overflowing in the springtime, and there were a bunch of nuclear power plants, one especially, I forget if it was in Iowa or one of the plain states there. And they thought they were going to have to shut down that plant because of the flooding. And the problem is they had to keep cooling the spent nuclear fuel casks that surrounded that facility. Today, most states don't allow transportation of nuclear fuel, so the fuel stays right at the location. And so these nuclear power plants have to keep running to continue to cool down the spent fuel that's sitting there. And so every year there's an increased amount of energy that's expended just to cool down the fuel. And if they ever stop doing that, these casks are going to start to melt down. It's a horrific problem. No, it's a meltdown. Basically, it just, it's like you had a plastic container on your stove and you turned the heat on. It's just going to melt, and all of that nuclear fuel is going to go into the environment. Remember Fukushima? The big problem there is they had over 600,000 spent fuel rods on the roof, cooling where the cooling system was. And when the reactors went, they vaporized all those fuel rods, and it all went into the atmosphere. A horrific nuclear event, and nobody wants to talk about that. The nuclear industry is so corrupt and so bad, and it's something that just nobody even talks about. It's off the scale how bad it is.
My concern for your sister, Elizabeth, would be, is she downwind or downriver if there's a river from the nuclear facility?
More than likely, I think so.
Is she east of the nuclear power plant is the question. But still, if those babies go down...
I think she's south.
Yeah, well, the problem is, if she's anywhere near there, the other issue is that when these things start going, they're going to affect vast areas and polluting the water. Right now, Biscayne Bay in Florida is so polluted with nuclear fuel that it's off the charts.
I've heard rumors that the creek around that facility is contaminated because the Indians have been complaining.
Oh, yeah. No, this is all over the country. The nuclear power plants are leaching nuclear waste into the groundwater because the piping is old. They can't get in there to fix it. They can't shut them down because they don't have the money. They didn't save the money. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission was supposed to monitor that. They never did. All the money got taken and stuck in somebody's pocket. It's unbelievable. the nuclear problem in this country and around the world is one of the biggest problems in the world, because it's one that is going to destroy all living life on this planet. So forget about Green New Deals. Start saving your money to decommission nuclear power plants.
There we go. Elizabeth, thank you for your call. We need to move on. Our next call.
I just want to mention, John, the Green New Deal, they consider nuclear fuel green. Okay.
Our next caller is John in Texas. Good morning, John.
Hello, Dr. McCanney.
Not Doctor.
Can you hear me?
It's Professor McCanney. Go ahead, John.
Or Professor McCanney. I apologize.
That's no big deal.
I have a question about nuclear. A nuclear question. Do you believe that the scenario that was created by Neville Shute in his novel On the Beach was a realistic depiction of what would really happen if there had been a nuclear war, either then or later, and then that would be in the mid to late 1950s or even now? According to Stan Deyo and some studies, that most of the worst fallout would be dissipated to safe levels within 2 weeks. Do you have any answer to that?
Okay, let's just talk about one nuclear bomb. And the scientists have done study on this. My advanced physics degree is in nuclear physics, something I happen to know a little bit about. But the studies indicate that a single nuclear bomb in the Mideast would affect the whole world, including the United States. And so the fallout not being there in like a week is not an issue. It's like Fukushima is polluting the Pacific Ocean. It's affecting the Great Barrier Reef. It's affecting the west coast of the United States. Nobody wants to talk about it. But an all-out nuclear war would that'd be the end of the planet. So
okay, it would. In other words, On the Beach is realistic.
I'm not familiar with that book, but I can just tell you that your idea that the fallout would be out of the atmosphere in 2 weeks is not an issue. That's not the question. The amount of pollution in the underground water, small amounts of nuclear waste can do a tremendous amount of damage. And so, nobody's going to really survive it. Let's put it that way. It's not something where one particular aspect like nuclear fallout going away in 2 weeks, and that's not true either. It's going to go in the upper atmosphere. It's going to be there for a long, long time. It's going to be circling the Earth for a very long time. It's going to be coming down in snow. It's going to be in the snow runoff, depending on which hemisphere you're in. So anyway, no, it's not going to go away. It's not going to kind of like magically disappear in 2 weeks. That's totally not true.
All right. John, thank you for your call. Our next caller is Dan Sutterfield, my friend Dan. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, John. A backhoe is not worth much without a good ground guy.
Well, your ground guy was pretty wore out by the end of the day.
Well, I apologize.
This just sounds tough, let alone being there on site. Wow, okay. Anyway, Dan, what's up?
I don't want to hear what you're going to say, but I'm going to listen real close. Would you, I hate to aggravate you with this, but would you bring us up to date on Fukushima, your best estimate of what's going on? If there is still an option that they're not taking to destroy this thing or to get it under control, this is a multifaceted thing. And then the food chain, should we even consider eating anything out of the Pacific Ocean? I mean, the fishery up in Alaska, I hear horror stories. I'd much rather hear the truth from you than somebody's supposition, and I'll listen off the air. And thank you, gentlemen, very much.
All right.
Yeah, well, that's a hot topic of what's going on the west coast of the U.S., but I've heard the horror stories, too, the deformed fish and wildlife. And, there are people that have studied that area their entire lives. And I mentioned earlier the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, with half of the life there dead now. And they're talking about due to global warming. The scientists, one of the big problems is the government-paid scientists are all clammed up. They don't talk about the truth. So you have individual researchers who are talking about it who are being silenced. So we, technically, we don't really know the story, but there's enough information to say that, yeah, it's really bad. But as far as, say, eating something from the West Coast, if it has radiation or whatever, I can't tell you that. That's not something that I personally have information on. But that's not because it doesn't exist. It's not just like everything with the nuclear industry. It's clammed up. It's like other things like space exploration. You get the apple pie and mom version in the news media. You don't get the real version of certain types of news. It's completely clammed up and hidden. So, but nuclear power worldwide is the biggest disaster that the human race is going to face ever, and is facing right now.
Okay. I think we answered that question pretty thoroughly. Anything else, Dan?
He's still there.
No, you did fine. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for the call. This whole issue of the nuclear matter is pretty much not covered at all in either an alternative or mainstream media, either one these days, is it, Jim?
No, in fact, for right where you are, John, St. Louis is horrifically polluted because during World War II, that's one of the sites where they did the separation for the Manhattan Project. And they took all of that, the trailings, the leftovers, the low yield stuff out and just dumped it in a garbage dump.
Right.
So all of that's leaching into the water. I know people around St. Louis that have farms and that all their animals die regularly. They can't have animals on their farm because of that leftover pollution, and they don't know how to go in and get it out of there, or what to do with it, even if they could find it and dig it up. The same thing is going on in Oregon, where they took it and dumped it all over the land, like with manure spreaders. So it's all over the place. Just an absolute mess. Yeah, World War II was an extremely polluting event, besides being just a sample of man's insanity, but tremendously polluting event.
Yep. Well, another aspect of that was the release of sodium fluoride over in New Jersey area, which began the whole story, the cover story, to make people believe that sodium fluoride had some benefit inside human beings.
Somehow it's good for your teeth.
Yeah, what a fantasy.
Dentist, I was to a dentist a little while ago, and they offered me fluoride treatment, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. But it's still promoted by dentists as you should get this and pay. It was an expensive treatment. When I said no, it was like they were shocked. Well, you should be getting this for your teeth. Don't you want your teeth there? Oh my goodness, yeah.
Well, my dentist, who's also a personal friend, he will not allow sodium fluoride in his practice. I know of another dentist who knows sodium fluoride is bad for human beings. It should not be used in any way in human beings. But he doesn't want to give up the income that he receives from sodium fluoride treatment, even though he knows it's bad. That's so wrong and so unethical.
Yep, it's a tremendously profitable business. So, yeah, as long as that keeps going on, we'll then still have little kids going in there getting their fluoride treatment. And everybody, it's up to grandma and grandpa too. Everybody.
I know. It's just such a shame that people get caught up in these things that are so destructive and so harmful. We've got our last break coming up here soon, and then we'll be wrapping up this segment.
Yeah, John, there's the Nobel Prize for Physics just given out, and it's really bizarre. They're giving a Nobel Prize for something that's never been detected. People can't define what it is. It's something called dark matter. And this has been around. In fact, the original papers were back decades and decades ago, and nobody has ever detected dark matter. They can't tell you what it's supposed to look like or feel like or how you're supposed to measure it, what properties it has. Yet a Nobel Prize has been politically given again to people studying something that they can't prove even exists. So that gives you the state of the Nobel Prize in Physics.
Well, there's a committee of men and women that grant these prizes, and of course, I don't know who these men and women are, but clearly and obviously it's been captured. The majority vote has been captured by people who are living in fantasy land, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's gone off the wall nuts. There's other people who won it for studying exoplanets, and it's a whole different topic. So they have kind of a couple things going on there, but now they're being pressured to find people who are non-white to get the Nobel Prize. That'll be the next thing. So if you're black or of the LGBT community, you're going to have a better chance of getting a Nobel Prize. And if you're white, your chances are going to go down. But it's just a result that the majority of science has been done by United States and Europeans, especially, and for some reason, that's been the bulk of people who are in science. So it's like saying, let's. What if we had a contest for the best car designs throughout history? Well, it turns out that most cars were researched and developed by white guys. So that's why there's the majority of people if you gave a prize for designing cars and developing the auto industry, that's who did it.
Well, something that's you're right, Jim, and something that's politically neutral, anybody can observe, is what countries receive patents, citizens of what countries receive patents. That's politically neutral and easily discoverable.
Yeah, and so it's a matter of who's discovering things, who's doing stuff. So the idea that everybody else should jump on the bandwagon, anyway, that's just another political aspect of the prize.
The Seattle School District has now declared more or less that mathematics is racist.
Right, I saw that. and so, yeah, anyway, it's pretty bizarre. But anybody that sends their kids to public schools today ought to have their head examined. So
it's just tantamount to child abuse. It is. Jim, thank you, sir. We'll have you back next week. Appreciate it. October. Your prepper tip of the day. I want to encourage all of you, gentlemen, if you want to be a hero for the ladies on your team, stock up on feminine hygiene products by the case, toiletries by the case. If some of these things are a mystery to you, for most men, the things that girls do are somewhat mysterious. Just check out the products that they use routinely, and get them in case lots and put them back in storage. And at some future date, you might be a hero because you did that. We have patient waiting in the green room, my friend Jeff Nyquist. He has a new website, and is it jrnyquist.blog, Jeff?
Hey, Jeff? How's it going?
Good.
Hello.
Your new website is jrnyquist.blog?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, I got it right. And
Yes,
you have
you
a
did.
new article published at your website that I read last night. You put forth an interesting premise that we're going to discuss. And good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
Okay, tell us about your new article. What's the title of it, and what's your premise?
Well, it is the triumph of provocation in Hong Kong. And the premise, of course, is that provocation is the main method used by communists to manipulate politically, and that the provocation has been underway in Hong Kong. I've been looking at the leaders of the Hong Kong independence movement, and they don't pass my smell test. And what's going on there doesn't make sense unless you understand that China is attempting to, that is Communist China, is attempting to put one over on us. The Chinese government in Beijing has controlled the government in Hong Kong for a long time. They've had 22 years to infiltrate it, to interfere in the process. Look, they've interfered in the process of our own government, of the United States government. They infiltrate everywhere. This is what communists do. There's a lot of power in China. There's a lot of money in China now, since the United States invested in China and built it up as a significant industrial and financial power. And of course, why would they disrupt Hong Kong, being such an important city for them? Well, because Hong Kong is the gateway directly into the West. And by creating this provocation, they get us to step up and defend freedom. And of course, this new bill that has passed Congress that is waiting, I think, for President Trump to sign, which is the Hong Kong Freedom and Democracy Act, is going to make a visa waiver for Chinese entering the United States from Hong Kong. So the situation is set up for a large number of refugees to come into the United States from China through Hong Kong, if you know what I mean. And refugees have been a particularly interesting weapon used by the Russians in terms of Europe, in terms of putting more than 1 million Muslims into the heart of Germany and more. And so, and we know that what happened in Europe was due to the Assad and the Russians bombing Syrian villages and pouring people from different countries where they could apply pressure, causing them to move into the heart of Europe. And it really has paralyzed Germany in financial terms, in terms of having to take care of millions of refugees, who many of whom are of military age, right? You see these people flowing into Germany, and it's like, wait a minute, these are young men. These are not all families. So are we going to have, they've been trying to pour people in here from Latin America. They've been trying to cross the border. Trump has been holding them up at the border. He's not allowing it. But now, is this a gimmick? Is this a trick for pouring refugees through a different venue? I don't know. It's interesting to watch it unfold. It's interesting that there's a visa waiver. It's interesting that Martin Lee, who is one of the senior leaders of the Hong Kong independence movement, has extensive and interesting ties to Beijing going way back, ever since he defended a communist against drug charges in 1969. And it's very interesting, too, that Joshua Wong and Denise Ho would go to see Nancy Pelosi, representative from San Francisco, the city of San Francisco, which is the closest thing to a Hong Kong we have here in the United States, and that Hong Kong was a British colony, and San Francisco is like a Chinese colony here. This is what the expatriate Chinese kind of say about San Francisco, is that the communist Chinese have moved in, and they kind of they have very cozy relationships with our politicians there, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So this anyway, this is the scenario.
Fascinating stuff, and I think it bears looking into, and it needs to be put into the mix of things to be concerned about. kudos to you for putting that connection together, Jeff, and hopefully your concerns will find their way to the Oval Office, and maybe President Trump can do something about it.
Yeah, it hopefully. There's another angle too, is that these people, some of these rioters are attacking private businesses. This is rather curious. If the protest is against the Hong Kong government, why are private businesses being attacked? And the one thing occurs is, are some of these rioters, there's been stories, are some of these rioters possibly from the mainland? Could they be People's Liberation Army people? Could it be that the Beijing government wants to destroy the businesses of people who are marked out as enemies of the Beijing government in Hong Kong? It's also another element in this that should be looked at very closely.
Well, absolutely, they should be. And there are so many nuances to these matters with these refugees and these immigrants. Part of the overall plan, of course, is to change the demographics in this country by bringing in these immigrants from countries and cultures that don't share our values and have no interest in sharing our values, don't really want to be Americans. They just want free stuff. Would that be somewhat accurate?
Yeah, well, and also to get people into the country who are going to vote, as you say, for one party over another, so that a one-party political system could be imposed on the United States. One of the things that I found very interesting about Martin Lee, who is one of the senior leaders of the Hong Kong democracy movement, is that when the present Hong Kong Democratic Party was set up in the 1990s, he originally voted to give it the name the Hong Kong Communist Party. And he passes that off as a kind of joke now. But yeah, I don't
at the
think
time
it's a joke.
Was not a joke, though. It was a serious proposition at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. When you're in a country like Hong Kong, and you know that 5 years down the road, or it was 94, so that you know that 3 years down the road, the country is going to be handed over. Hong Kong, the city, is going to be handed over to Communist China. That is what I would call signaling your readiness to cooperate with the Beijing government. Saying something like that, voting for the name of the political party you were forming to be the Hong Kong Communist Party. It seems to me that we have a similar problem with the mix-up between the names of the Democratic Party and the Communist Party. I spoke last night to an 88-year-old Russian woman who has the distinction of having personally heard Stalin speak when she was a law student, who also knew Putin's mentor in the law school in St. Petersburg, and at the time Leningrad. And she described what we're seeing today to me from her point of view. She said that it was the Soviet the Soviet fascist mafia, she called it. She said she said that Mr. Schiff in Congress, that Nancy Pelosi, that the squad, that they were all clearly Soviet fascist mafia. And that was interesting because she said it's as clear as day to her. She said they're using Stalin's tactics. I found it rather interesting, and she's written a bunch of. Her name is Simona Pipko, and she's written a number of articles I'm going to try to publish on my website. The insight of someone who grew up in the Soviet Union, was a lawyer, had a career in the Soviet Union, and got out of that country, and had met and had heard some of the Soviet leaders, Andropov and Stalin, and has insights into Mr. Putin, and that Putin is an admirer of Stalin. That Stalin built the system. That Stalin is the guiding hand still, is what her opinion is. And she said, Stalin, if you met him, you would see that he was very intelligent, very evil, but very clear in his mind, very clear thinking and persuasive. That's how she described him. And, well, his followers aren't so clear thinking or persuasive to me.
Right. Well, that's really scary that Vladimir Putin admires Joe Stalin. That's real scary.
Yeah. And I've noticed this when I watch Putin's interviews. I asked her, I said, I've studied Stalin too, and I said, I've never seen him in person, but I've watched films of him. And I said, is it my imagination, or is Putin mimicking some of Stalin's mannerisms? And she said, oh, no, he is mimicking him. And she says that Putin is very clever, too. And so this is very frightening. When a person who is the leader of a country consciously goes about to mimic a previous leader in his actual way of talking, it's got to be that he's mimicking him in a broader sense.
Well, of course, it's a complete package. It's a complete package of mimicking, probably his posture, the way he walks, hand and body gestures, speech characteristics, and of course the way he thinks is mimicking Joe Stalin also, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And the thing is that we've all heard the phrase, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And I think that if a person really admires someone, and then they imitate that person because of their admiration for that person, and they want to be like that person in some sense. And I think when you listen to how deliberate Putin is, how he has this laconic way of replying, like when the Kursk submarine sank and he was on Larry King. I remember it was one of the first occasions we had to watch him in this country, and Larry King asked him, what happened to the Kursk? And he answered, it sank. And then there was this faint smile across his face. This is the kind of laconic speech that Stalin cultivated. Stalin would sit through a meeting and he wouldn't say much. And then at the end, he would kind of summarize what the other people said. It's a technique.
Well,
it is.
It is, and it worked for him. Joe Stalin was the leader of Russia for 25 years, something like that.
Well, yeah, he was pretty much the real leader because he was the general secretary of the party in when Lenin died in January 1923, and he died in 1953. So in March of 1953, so that's 30 years. Right.
Okay, 30 years. Well, I knew it was a good-sized chunk of time that he was the leader of that country. I recall in the film Enemy at the Gates, the actor who played Khrushchev made references to Joe Stalin as the boss. And you got, even if you didn't know anything going into the film, you got the impression very quickly that whatever the boss wanted, the boss got, up to and including having men commit suicide rather than face being executed by the boss.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, that's right. He was Stalin was very much feared, and he followed Machiavelli's admonition that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved. And literally, people would lose control of their bowels when or after meeting with him. It was so terrifying. He once very famously met with the director, who had gone ahead and made part of a film without his permission or guidance on making this film. And the director came in, and Stalin was late, and from behind the screen, he could hear Stalin saying, "What did you do?" Stalin really teased him. And, of course, he was terrified, absolutely terrified. And Stalin then said, well, I happen to like what you did. But he made him really tremble. You know, he took full advantage of it. And this is related in one of the Stalin biographies. But Stalin was kind of a genius of fear and a genius of manipulating and controlling and building. And this new biography of Stalin by Kotkin, the first volume is worth reading despite its flaws, because he actually realizes why Stalin was a genius, that all of the other communist leaders, they did not have the talent, the genius, to create a system so evil. It took an evil genius in order to even make it work, because normally evil cannot be sustained like that. And normally evil does not have that kind of a guiding hand. And all of the systems, Cuba,
Hold that
China,
thought. Hold that thought.
Yeah.
We got a break. We'll be right back. Wednesday, the 9th of October. 11 weeks, and it'll be 2020. In 3 weeks, we cut off the reservations for cabins on the Royal Caribbean Cruise Line. I'll be going on a cruise. Leon Green will be with us. It will be a lot of fun. We're hoping to get word soon that our friend Sam Andrews and his wife can join us. The details of the Caribbean cruise are at my website at thelibertyman.com. This is in February. What a time to be away from the cold weather. And there's 20 restaurants on this ship. It's a luxury resort on the water. That's what these cruise ships are. They're amazing, amazing places. The food's amazing, the people's amazing, and we'll get together every day to have very deep, detailed discussions. Details at my website at thelibertyman.com. If you don't have internet access, give our cruise director a call. She'll take care of you. Betsy Murphy. Her telephone number is 636-530-9502. I say again, 636-530-9502. Visiting with Jeff Nyquist. His new website is jrnyquist.blog. That's Bravo, Lincoln, Oscar, Golf, jrnyquist.blog. Jeff, we got a caller and holder. We got John in Texas. Good morning, John.
Hello, Mr. Nyquist. I have a question. Well, this has to do with China and East Asia during the time of from the death of Brezhnev all the way through to the quote collapse of the Soviet Union, and even afterwards. What was the actual? There was little coverage of this, but what was the actual? Why was there so little coverage of East Asian reaction to it? I mean, it was just sort of, they were not even paid attention to, and then they talk about, then after the Soviet Union was supposedly broke up, the media was saying, well, that communism was dead, or they were suggesting it. In fact, when there was a possibly greater danger from China, and they never even discussed Chinese reaction to it. Like it would just, like they would just be going the way, or that Russia had gone or something. They never talked about anything in Southeast Asia, or very little, at least until that crisis erupted in around 1994-95 when Clinton were a supposed crisis in 1995 in Korea, and the only thing that they paid much attention to at all was I saw some articles about was Cuba. So I mean, why was this? Why didn't they try and get a more? Was there a more thorough investigation, particularly after Tiananmen Square, when all they meant was almost a footnote was how People's Republic of China had recognized the Russia and the new republics that supposedly sprung up after it broke up.
I don't really understand the question. Brezhnev died in 1982. The Soviet Union supposedly collapsed in 1991. I'm not exactly sure.
Let me refine it. Why was there seemed to be so little coverage of any reaction in East Asia, in China and the communist Asian countries, to what was going on in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe? Can you explain this?
Well, the United States, news is in the United States is coverage of things that usually happen here or are of interest to Americans. We never really had a lot of good coverage of what was going on in communist countries.
Well, but it just seemed like
the news.
But it was all over the news while it was happening in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. But
the communists wanted us to believe that communism collapsed and went away. I mean, that was a trick that they played in the 1920s under Lenin's NEP. They played that trick when Stalin dissolved the Comintern in May 1943. Supposedly they were giving up communism. In those previous instances, they weren't going to try to take over the world with it. I mean, we've been through this before, So they did it again in a very calculated way. They made us believe the Cold War was over, so they could continue practicing, and we wouldn't be fighting back. We wouldn't be able to notice that they were infiltrating our own government, that they were taking over our schools. There'd be no vigilance. Anti-communist. The chief thing that happened with Gorbachev and the fall of the Berlin Wall and then the dissolution of the Soviet Union was that all anti-communists in the Western world became marginalized. We were all marginalized. We were like, you're not relevant anymore. We don't want to listen to what you have to say. Wait a minute, communism is still here. They're still subverting. They're still taking over your schools. And then they wouldn't hear us from that point on. And that's how we got Obama and we got the Clintons. And that's how we got the mess that we have in now when we elect a president who's a normal American who is accused of being a Russian agent by people who are Russian agents. That's how we got here.
And hold that thought, gentlemen. We have a break. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, J.R. Moore here on Wednesday, the 9th of October. My website is thelibertyman.com. Under products, drop-down menu, we've got AMSOIL there. My Lincoln Town Car is at 385,000 miles. Thank you very much, AMSOIL. My motorcycle uses AMSOIL. My other vehicle uses AMSOIL. And that's just simply the way it is. Right below that, a couple of products down, we've got the energy cleaner. If you've got arthritis pain, pure and simple, you need an energy cleaner. Joint pain, back pain, same thing. I was pretty active around the ranch here yesterday. I was the ground man for my buddy running the backhoe, and it was some pretty good manual labor. And I went to bed with some aches and pains, woke up pain-free this morning, and you can also. Check out the energy cleaner, $285 shipping included, American zip codes. I do offer a 90-day money-back guarantee on the energy cleaner, something your healthcare professional is highly unlikely to do. You can place your order right there at my website for your energy cleaner, your mattress pad to go with it, or you can call my toll-free order line 24 hours a day. Here it is, 800-592-9543. I say again, 800-592-9543. Visiting with Jeff Nyquist, his new website is jrnyquist.blog. Have we concluded answering John's questions there, Jeff?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, real good. Well, John, we do thank you for your call. We move on here to Glenn in Philadelphia. Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning. Good morning, John. Good morning, Jeff. It seems to me that America has this annoying predilection for pulling out of military situations at inopportune times, thus leaving our comrades in arms to get pelted by the enemy. The classic overarching example here is when we betrayed Czech and China, allowing Mao to overrun China, and Chiang Kai-shek's forces having to retreat to the island of Formosa and form what is now today the nation of Taiwan. We're doing this again today in pulling out of Syria and leaving the Kurds, who have fought with us against ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, to get pelted by a major power, foreign power, Turkey, and ISIS again rearing its ugly head. And so now we're going to have Turkey and ISIS beating up on the ones we've betrayed. What's your opinion about the situation with the Kurds?
It bothers me because, some of our allies abroad have fought harder and lost more lives fighting than we have. And one of the reasons to have allies is because if the United States were just merely within its own borders, given the enemies that we have, they would have blockaded us and destroyed us economically long ago. A modern country can't exist unless we have freedom of the seas, unless we have outposts and allies abroad. And it is, obviously I don't want our country to be in wars with these in these regions, but once you commit to something like that, you're committing to people, to human beings. And then when you abandon them, it's quite ugly.
Yes. What might the world be like today if we had not betrayed Chiang Kai-shek?
Oh, it would be remarkably better, I would say. With China being nationalist, it would be much better than what we have now. This is very dangerous, what's happened with China, building up its military. Yeah. Yeah,
the China we were supporting, with Claire Chennault and the Flying Tigers, protecting them from the Japanese prior to World War II, was a very different China that has existed since communism and Mao took over. Mao killed people his own countrymen by the tens of millions. And had Chiang Kai-shek prevailed, perhaps we'd have been looking at China with a constitutional republic even, and that seems like a bit of a reach, but it would certainly be a much better situation. But
certainly Taiwan, certainly the Republic of China did evolve to a constitutional republic.
Right. So, in other words, what if all of mainland China could have been like Taiwan is today?
Well, we would have an ally against Russia that would make Russia, put Russia in an impossible position strategically. There would be no real chance of taking down the United States without Russia and China together. The biggest country is Russia, and the biggest country in population is China. So together, they make quite a team.
Right. It's a shame that didn't become the case. The Kurds, I have great empathy for the Kurds. First, they were promised a homeland in northern Iraq, back during the days of Desert Storm and everything, and they're known for being ferocious fighters, but they aren't inherently troublemakers. They seem to be a people just looking for a place to be without being harassed. And, they've stood with us against ISIS in Syria, and, there has been talk of setting up a homeland for them there and chopping up Syria. But none of this seems to happen. I fear they will simply become, in spite of their status as ferocious fighters, they may become beleaguered, worn down, and whittled down. And, it just doesn't seem right that everybody seems to betray those people.
Well, it's really not right because Turkey is a NATO ally, and Mr. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, seems to be more allied with Moscow. And, some of us, I'm not alone in this, suspect that the supposed coup attempt against him was really a maneuver for him to get rid of his political rivals and establish himself as a dictator, and that he seems to have been aligned with Moscow ever since then. I mean, if you really look at his policies, I don't know that we can regard Erdogan's Turkey as a truly NATO country. I suspect that it's on Russia's side, and that's very dangerous because in this situation, it means that Russia and Russia's allies are gaining control of the Middle East. It means that Saudi Arabia may be not long for this world. The misstep in Iraq meant that the balance of power in the Middle East was shifted in a way that maybe broke the balance. The Saudis can't defend themselves. And now with Iraq being, Iraq. We basically fought this war in Iraq so that Iraq would be an extension of Iran, because that's when we made a Shiite majority country. That's who we handed Iraq over to, is the Iranians. The Iranians were able to infiltrate it. They were able to use it and exploit it. And the Iranians are basically clients of Moscow. The Turks, if Erdogan is a real ally of Moscow, the Turks are allies of Moscow now. Syria is allies of Moscow. Now we've handed the upper regions of the Middle East to these powers that are aligned with Moscow. I don't see how we can maintain control of that oil, which is vital to Japan and Europe, under those circumstances, not for long. And I think that's what we're facing now in the Middle East.
Well, this all geopolitically sort of fits with, I'm sure you're aware that dispensational Christians are watching out for the Magog War, which involves a lot of these powers eventually coming down against Israel. But things have certainly changed with Turkey, because in the second half of the 20th century, it wasn't that long ago that the U.S. and Israel both had air bases in a Western-friendly Turkey. But that has certainly been all upended.
Yeah, Erdogan also has moved towards the Islamist end of the spectrum, making the sign of the gray wolves during his political campaigns, going around with people belonging to radical Islamic organizations. I saw a clip of him celebrating a little Turkish Islamic girl who was going to be a jihadi. It was rather shocking. I mean, this is the president of a NATO country. Turkey has really gone through a transformation. It isn't Ataturk's Turkey anymore. This is a different place.
It's interesting, since Shiite Islam is only supposed to compose 20% of Islam worldwide, and yet in this particular region, these countries, we're really seeing a disproportionate development of Shiite power. Given that
it's because 20%. Iran is Shiite and the majority in Iraq is Shiite, and Iran is particularly powerful. Its power has been built up by Russia. The Iranians are not Arabs. They have a great education and competency, and their military power versus Israel and the U.S. is not to be as despised as the Arab power was. The Arabs have not made tradition in recent times. They've not made efficient military machines. They've lost most of the wars that they fought. The Iranians have a different tradition. Persia comes out of that part of the world. And what I'm told by military experts is that they're very good at organizing. And a lot of military things are about organizing.
Right. So that the descendants of the Persians, but the
yes,
and then you have the Houthis in Yemen and all that sort of thing being fueled by them too.
Well, and the Turks are famously a military race of people who conquered a great deal in the past. They were the military arm of Islam when the Arab powers gave out. Something happened with the Arabs during their expansion, and they ceased to be effective as a military power. The Turks became the military power for Islam. And it seems like Erdogan wants that role for Turkey again. And that's what makes him... Yeah.
Yeah, we hear the term revived Roman Empire from time to time in the West, but they're looking for a revived Ottoman Empire, apparently.
Yes.
But
this is part of the propaganda of Erdogan, bringing back this kind of thing, this kind of pride for Turkey. And the Turkish people are ethnically, they're very patriotic people, very patriotic.
Jeff, what's your take on what's going on with Putin? There have been people speculating that he's been avoiding Moscow throughout the summer and early fall here. That he's spent a good bit of time in France. He's been in Sochi. But do you think there's internal dissent against Putin, such that he's actually avoiding Moscow or something like that, or afraid of internal opposition?
Well, his popularity fell below 30%. It's down in the 20s somewhere. The election of Zelensky in Ukraine seemed to have an impact on Russian public opinion. They saw that certain propaganda themes of Putin's government were false. The Zelensky's debates with Poroshenko, the stadium debates kind of revealed that Poroshenko was indeed a shill of Moscow, that he had fooled everybody. And suddenly the Russians could see that, the Russian people could see that the claim that Russia had not intervened in eastern Ukraine was false, especially when you saw so many Russians in eastern Ukraine voting for Zelensky. And it in a way, it's very hard sometimes when you get caught out in a lie. There's a sort of a shame. There was even I am told by people in Moscow, there's been a liberal turn, almost like when you had under Gorbachev, that there's a loosening up in Moscow because the system is afraid of the people, and they need to loosen up because the people are sort of demanding it. Public opinion is demanding it. Given how many years Putin has left, I'm not sure how they're going to play it out. But they have to be careful right now because anything Putin does or says could be very unpopular, could really hurt the regime. So, because the people are economically hurting there, and they're beginning to blame the government was blaming us. The Americans did this. They interfered in Ukraine and they hurt our economy, and they're blockading our goods and they're doing this and that. It's really, the propaganda wasn't true. Our sanctions against Russia are a few military goods and 17 countries 17 different oligarchs in 5 companies. So it isn't really what it was cracked up to be. It's because they're preparing for war, their people are suffering economically. They're putting everything into their military there. They're trying to build it up very quickly, and of course it's hurt them. It's kind of the position Hitler was in 1938. He was about to become very unpopular. The mood was turning against him in Germany when that war started, when he started to push for war. And war was really the only way to maintain his authority and his popularity, was to have military victories. But Putin isn't Hitler, so he can't. And probably he would like to do that. Maybe they will attack. But right now, the Russian public, the mood is quite seriously against the Kremlin.
If for whatever reason Putin were to end up out of office, what sort of sea change do you think we would see in Russia?
Oh, we would have another perestroika. They would have to do that. They always use controlled opposition. They don't want anyone genuinely to set up a democracy. So they would weather it like they did before. They'd have somebody like a Boris Yeltsin. They'd have a controlled thing. Even if Navalny is honest and they had him as president, they would have him so surrounded and packed in with KGB agents that he wouldn't be able to effectively change anything. They'd wait for the people to be dissatisfied with that, and they'd move back to somebody, again, like Putin, somebody who would reestablish a kind of Soviet feeling to the country, which is what Putin did after Yeltsin.
But the likelihood of the rise of another Gorbachev isn't that great.
No, they wouldn't have a Gorbachev. They would they'd use a Navalny. It's the whole thing is the system did it. Gorbachev didn't do it by himself. It wasn't him. The system was all primed to go into this liberalism. They had planned it since the late 1950s. They came up with a plan of liberalizing. They needed to wait for the World War II generation to be largely past before they did it, because that generation fought for the Red Banner and for Soviet patriotism. So they waited for that generation before they did it. But they were trying to, of course, conduct what is called a maneuver in Marxist-Leninist terms to fool the West and get us to disarm, because the biggest question is the nuclear question. If they could get rid of our nuclear arsenal, they would own the Earth.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Glenn, we do thank you for your call. We need to get to our last caller before we end the show. John in Tennessee. Good morning, John.
Thank you, John. Good morning, Jeff. I know we're getting short on time, so I'm going to kind of preface this very quickly and then ask my question. Thanks to John, I met a gentleman by the name of Ralph Epperson who has become a good friend. Do you know who Ralph is, Jeff?
Ralph Epperson, I'm not quite sure.
The author of the Unseen Hand.
Okay, he's a very good friend. The subtitle of the book is An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. So knowing, Jeff, what we know about Russia, Great Britain, and the United States prior to World War II and after World War II, actually allies in the war. And there's an image that sticks out in my mind, Jeff. It's Yalta, where they're all sitting together, best of friends, smiling, deciding how they're going to split up Europe. So if we were goaded into World War II by allowing Japan, actually forcing Japan, because of blockades and embargoes, to attack Pearl Harbor, to eat and to heat and not freeze and starve to death. And we go to war to fight Japan, but we don't get there until 4.5 years after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Jeff, what has changed, and why should I fear Russia or China any more than I should fear my own government, knowing that they have been lying to the American people for 100 years?
Because the people that have made you afraid of your government are the same people that control China and Russia. It's the communism. It's the Soviet mafia. It's the Soviet socialist mafia. They look. Alger Hiss went with FDR to Yalta. Alger Hiss was a Soviet spy.
And what was Roosevelt?
A Soviet spy. Well,
what was Roosevelt, Jeff?
Well, that's very interesting. What was Roosevelt? Roosevelt get all these.
What was Churchill, Jeff?
What do you mean? What was Churchill?
We're living in a dream. Shakespeare had it right. All the world is a stage, and the men and women are merely the players. We're being deceived. And once again, I'm not saying this in anger, but to cast fear against Russia and China and not warn the American people about our own nation is at the best out of the purest form of ignorance, or at the very worst, disingenuous.
Okay, well let's let Jeff answer that. We got. Thank you, John.
I mean, you don't agree with me, but I believe that the phenomenon is communism. It is the thing that took hold in Russia and China, and they're trying to take over this country. And it's like a new religion. They believe they can run everything through the government using these principles of socialism, and that's what they want to create in the whole world. And they seem to be prevailing. Nobody seems to be opposing them.
Well, you and I are. We have a lot of people opposing them, but we don't have the ability to do much about it.
It doesn't seem we have enough people. We don't seem to control the institutions of the country. They took over education already.
Agreed.
You know.
Agreed.